What did you see?
A bell-shaped type of anti-gravity ship that they operate as a scout ship.
This is the voice of Allah, representative of the Ashtar Galactic Command, speaking to you.
This planet is part of a larger federation.
A galactic federation complete with an underground base on Mars where there are American and alien representatives apparently present. He also explains that President Trump both knows about them and was on the verge of disclosing their existence, only to be persuaded not to by the Federation.
But we have often called it and referred to it in the past as the Markab Confederacy.
A galactic federation.
And I asked him what he wanted, and he said, "My name is Solganda, and I would be pleased to show you our craft."
What did you see?
A bell-shaped type of anti-gravity ship that they operate as a scout ship.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our talk this Sunday. Thank you so much for joining me. And this talk is called The Dark Side of Disclosure. And we are going to be basically confronting the very bizarre and concerning reality that for the last 70 years, at least, there have been people, human beings like you and I, dressing up and pretending to be aliens and abducting people or meeting with people in order to bring forward a technological revolution or technological dystopia that enforces an incredible amount of control over humanity, and also a new religion, a new alien god religion that rewrites human origins and basically sets humanity on a very dark path of powerlessness. So that's going to be the topic of today. And this is actually a continuation of a lecture that I did last month called Angels to Aliens, where we described the kind of transition of the reality that the spiritual hierarchies and the angels were typically taking the place of what aliens are now today. And over time, what we've seen is sort of the profaning of the concept of the angelic hierarchies or the spiritual hierarchies into this idea of like a galactic federation or space brothers or these Anunnaki alien beings. You can see the same concept sort of sometimes peter out because it's maybe a little bit ridiculous or whatever, and then it picks up a whole new personality in another author or another writer or another movement. But it's the same core phenomenon, and that's the phenomenon that we are going to be examining very, very closely today as we observe this sort of idea of these alien gods that are really people dressed up as aliens that are making this contact from the 1950s to today, and how it's captured the New Age, it's captured ufology, and it's become so deeply embedded that it's just a reality to people. And there's a very sinister undercurrent to this. The whole thing doesn't have to be that way, but we have to examine the sinister undercurrent of this, the subversive undercurrent of this, if we want to actually move forward into the future in a healthy way. So I'm going to be doing this talk a little bit differently today. I'm going to be doing the entire lecture on YouTube, Rumble, and Facebook. But the question and answer portion, I'm just going to be doing with my members today. So if you are a member and you are watching this on my own platform at gigiyoung.com, I will be taking your questions after the lecture. So I will disappear on YouTube, Rumble, and Facebook, and I will only be available on my platform. And the members will be from, the questions will be from members. So if you want to take part in that, now is a good time to sign up and get your question in so I can take it after this part of our talk. So a lot of people will see the sort of Space Brothers phenomenon, or the Anunnaki phenomenon even, or this idea that there's these aliens that are watching over us and sort of behind every political decision, or the aliens are these spiritual beings that have created humanity or that control humanity. And a lot of people look at that and they either laugh at it or they believe it. But what a lot of, I think, people don't realize is that there is a kernel of truth in it. And this kernel of truth is what makes really far out what sounds like science fiction or what sounds silly. That's what makes it believable to the public, is that there's often a kernel of truth, a very small little piece of truth that gets profaned and distorted more and more and more over time. And so when we understand the kernel of truth, we can understand the phenomenon. But if we're only entering into this topic from the phenomenon or from, the alien god ideology or Gaia TV or ancient aliens or the mainstream circuit in ufology, the New Age, we're probably not going to get to the root of it. So let's get to the root of it. So the root of the idea of these, what people would call aliens today, coming to the earth and interacting with humanity, and in some streams, creating humanity in like a petri dish like Sitchin, or building every single temple like von Daniken, or in the New Age, forming a galactic federation. That actually all stems back to a very real event that happened in Lemuria, or in, mainstream religion that would be seen as the Garden of Eden event. So all of this actually goes back to a misinterpretation of what happened there. And now why it tends to be misinterpreted or misunderstood is because technically the Garden of Eden, or the Lemurian era, is not completely solid. And that means that what happened in that epoch is difficult to understand from a materialist perspective, in which we've been sinking deeper and deeper into for thousands of years. And so it's very difficult for us to comprehend an environment and a situation that couldn't happen today, the way that we live today as physical beings. And so this is part of the reason why the topic becomes so profaned, is because, as I've lectured before in Esoteric Secrets of Disclosure, the earth is not in the same condition, humanity is not in the same condition, and therefore the angelic hierarchies interact with us in a little bit of a different way. It's experienced differently. And people often think it's another planet because it's a different density, but it's not. It's actually our Earth. So ultimately, what happens during the Lemurian epoch is that there are what are called the angels of Lemuria, or the angels of Venus. And now this is not the planet Venus. This is not, beings from Venus that are people or even physical getting into a nuts and bolts spaceship and coming to the earth. That's not what this story is about. That's not what this happening was about. Venus in this case is the higher aspect of the planet, and every single planet in the solar system and the cosmos at large is an aspect of the earth, which is why we can perceive it, or an aspect of the sun. And in occult science, we seek to understand exactly how these spheres and stars relate to ourselves, and that goes back to human initiation. So essentially, every planet in our solar system is a different condition of consciousness and life, and a different step of initiation for the human being at large in our solar system school, as I like to call it. So part of the Earth evolving is higher beings from within the solar system, which in classical Christianity is called the angelic hierarchies. And that's why in Christian mysticism, in the Vedas, and every single occult tradition, you see the angels or different aspects of the angelic hierarchies associated with planetary spheres. You have Michael, who's a solar angel. You have Gabriel, who's a lunar angel. You have Orpheus, who's a Saturnian angel. that is for a reason, but that does not mean that they're aliens, right? This is where the literalism comes in. So in the Garden of Eden, what ends up happening is that these angels from Venus, they appear on the earth because the earth is essentially a lower aspect of Venus. And they create, through a sacrifice that they do, essentially, the substrate of the human mind. So they give through their sacrifice, through kind of like what would be to them a kind of death or an excarnation. They essentially give humanity the organ of mind. They give humanity something of themselves. Okay. For more information on this, check out my Venus videos because I get exactly into how that could happen and why. But essentially, they give humanity what in the Eastern tradition is called manas, M-A-N-A-S, or what in the Western tradition is called the mind. And this is what allows humanity to begin thinking objectively, begin to do sort of like calculations, begin to see themselves, begin to see the world as an objective being. And it paves the way for the full reception of self-consciousness, which we begin to really reach in our period. And so this is also where people get a little bit hung up in the idea that aliens created humanity, because these angels from the realm of Venus, which is their angels, sacrificed an aspect of their own being to create the organ of mind. Okay, so that's not the creation of humanity. Humanity had already been in existence and in various different stages of evolution for millions of years. All right, so no beings created humanity. That's not a real thing. But the angelic hierarchies and higher spiritual beings will interact with humanity at certain points for an initiation purpose, and humanity will basically receive through their sacrifice. So angels have to sacrifice to do this, an organ of consciousness, a new organ of consciousness, which leads to the evolution of humanity at large. Okay, so if we were to look at the astral dynamic, we'd be able to see the spiritual hierarchies, the angels and their interaction, and the reality that angels and archangels and archai and principalities and all of these different angels are going through their own series of initiations themselves. So one day angels will become archangels, one day archangels will become archai, and so on and so forth. And so there is even a process of initiation within the angels themselves, and humanity is part of that. And humanity, we will evolve into eventually the position of angel. Okay, so we really have to look at ourselves as being part of the angelic hierarchy, receiving forces from the angelic hierarchy that help us to evolve. But the reception of these forces is not a taking, it's not an abuse, it's not a manipulation, it's not genetic modification, it's not these sick things that we hear today. It is the sacrifice of these higher beings that allows us to have this, and this allows them to move further. So the principle of sacrifice is incredibly important and, quite frankly, very different than a lot of the mainstream narratives that say that our beginning is through genetic manipulation. And to reiterate this, I'm not saying that there wasn't a period where humanity was tampered with. We know that the Atlantean era and earlier periods, there were dark ages, and dark entities try to manipulate the form to enter it. That's been well established on my channel. So it's not that there isn't tampering, it's that that is not creation. And that is the key to understanding what we're talking about today. So the next principle, after understanding the principle of sacrifice and the creation of new organs for humanity, and that's also where you get in the story of the Garden of Eden, this image of the loss of innocence or the fall from grace, is that now humanity is self-aware. That's one example of it. Now humanity has the organ of mind from the angels of Venus, and now they are self-aware. Okay. But we also know that in the Garden of Eden story, there's a serpent. And the serpent is often associated with Lucifer and therefore Venus. And this is a nod to, of course, the esoteric reality that it was the planet Venus that was overshadowing the Earth during the Lemurian epoch that gave this impulse of evolution. So also during the Lemurian Eden epoch, we see a kind of initiation period for the angels. Okay, and this isn't often talked about, especially with the understanding of Lucifer and who Lucifer is. Lucifer is often viewed as Christ for many different Luciferians and people who walk the left-hand path. They view Lucifer as being basically a Christ figure, and every time that light is mentioned or the sun is mentioned, that's a reference to Lucifer. But that is actually being stuck in this Lemurian period, in which Lucifer in the earlier period was the highest angel, but falls from grace. So he can no longer be seen as the great initiator. That's Christ. So ultimately what happens during the Garden of Eden is that a portion of the angels of Venus fall, okay? They fall due to selfishness and because they can't develop the love impulse. And they follow a different impulse that we would know as selfishness and pride. They essentially become cast into the lower realms of the earth. And I get into this a little bit more in Electric Apocalypse about the inner earth and that kind of whole thing that happened there. And so usually people will say about a third of the angels fell, and they fell with Lucifer. And when they fell with Lucifer, they essentially take on that Luciferic impulse of the era. So when an angel falls, they move into what's called often the eighth sphere or the lower astral plane within the bowels of the earth. That's how it's represented. And they essentially would be seen as like a demonic entity. But all of the angels that fall, they fall within a certain impulse and they repeat it and they stay within that impulse and they keep emitting it. And when they interact with people, they keep that Luciferic impulse, but they don't evolve. And so eventually they begin to rot. And that's where you get the portrayal of them looking quite rotten or part animal, things like that, because they hold on to that Luciferic impulse and cannot receive any initiations further due to turning their back on the Christ impulse and refusing to serve it, essentially. So this is really key because a lot of people can be stuck as though their consciousness is trapped in the Lemurian period. And they'll hold Lucifer as Christ, and they will start to fall into fallen angel worship. And they'll become trapped in this idea that fallen angels are the great initiators, that they created humanity, all this kind of stuff. All of that goes back to essentially the Garden of Eden and the fall of the angels that came from Venus. So the other 2/3, if you want to use that number, they end up reaching a higher level of initiation overall. They end up going into archangel or archai status, and they are then associated with the sphere Mercury. Okay, and so this is where you get the idea that Hermes and the mercurial gods have a perfected mind and they're advanced and associated with Christ, is because that represents the astral graduation of the angels of Venus into the higher, through the Christ impulse, into yet an even higher station. So it's important to know that some angels fell with Lucifer and other angels reached yet an even higher station. because sometimes people think that, the fallen angels are the angels on the earth, not realizing that the angelic hierarchies are always with humanity. They're always here. And humanity really receives their light and their initiations not from fallen angels, those are demonic entities, but from the real spiritual hierarchy in which we are part of. Okay, so that's where we receive the initiating impulses. Okay, so that is essentially the teaching of the angels from Venus in the Garden of Eden that started all of this. That is the core teaching. And when you start to fast forward to, say, 1950, the post-war period, you start to see all of these people that claim that they're being contacted by Venusians, and that these Venusians are showing up in these nuts and bolts spaceships and talking to them and giving them spiritual teachings and telling them how to build technologies. And that is just the manipulation of this very early origin myth that we have about Lemuria and the Garden of Eden and the angels from Venus. It's being basically twisted and abused. Right? So that's where the Venus element comes from, with George Van Tassel, with Valiant Thor, with Howard Menger, with Adamski, all of that stuff. Our bubble thumb is back, so that's good. We can celebrate that. Okay. So I don't want you to take my word for it. I'm going to read to you some different incredible occultists that have talked about the angels of Venus. So Rudolf Steiner mentions the angels of Venus in his spiritual hierarchies lectures, actually several different times. And the one that I'm going to be reading from is lecture 7. And this is about Venus as the initiating planet for the Earth during earlier periods of development. And he says, the spirits of personality came down to Earth as Venus spirits in ancient Lemurian times. The Venus messengers who had taken on human countenance on Earth, the countenance as they were then, were of a special significance for the whole of the universe. Cosmically, they reached up to Venus, and their deeds were of significance for the whole cosmic system. So here Rudolf Steiner is talking about how the Earth and humanity are initiated and receive higher organs and forces from the spiritual hierarchies, which are ultimately represented in planetary spheres. So we're getting into actually a very deep cosmic teaching that gets to the basis of what human initiation is, and also what cosmogenesis is, how the planet evolves. These are some of the most precious and deep and meaningful and important teachings that we can possibly understand, because when you know what the planets represent and cosmogenesis, so how a planet is formed and then dissolved and the initiation that's associated with that, you can't really be tricked. Like once you understand the pure cosmic teachings of the spheres, you can't really be manipulated, right? So this is the whole goal. The whole goal is to be able to do all these calculations yourself through understanding pure esoteric science and not having to believe a whistleblower, not having to believe what some psychic says or something, because they can connect and understand this stuff and you can't. If you can understand the cosmic science, esoteric science, you can do all of this yourself. And that's the ultimate goal of our era and the true purpose of the Aquarian age. So this also existed before it came into anthroposophy. It also existed in Theosophy. And Blavatsky talked about this exact event in the cosmogenesis and I think anthropogenesis portion of the Secret Doctrine. And she calls them oftentimes the same beings, these angels from Venus that we've been talking about. She calls them the Kumaras, the Lords of the Flame, the Dhyani Kohans, which is actually the Eastern word for these beings, which is Dhyani Kohans, or angels, monads, Petries. There's so many different words for the same phenomenon and the same beings, depending on the angle in which you enter into the topic, depending on the culture that you enter the topic into. So depending on if you're coming in from an Eastern position, you're going to be calling that a Petri, a solar Petri, lunar Petri. You're going to be calling them a Kumara or a Dhyani Kohan. If you're coming in from the Western side, you're going to be calling this an angel. Okay, but they're all different words to describe the same thing. And every single culture will usually highlight things a little bit differently because because every single culture and religion is essentially encapsulating spirituality in a different developmental time. But it's the same phenomenon. So, one of the books that I find that does a very good job on the cosmic aspect of this is actually called The Fountain Source of Occultism by G.D. Peruker. Here it is here. Here's my copy. And on page 184, he gets into the nature of life on different planets. And this is basically like, if you have trouble reading the Secret Doctrine, then I think that Peruker does a good job and on sort of describing things in a more modern or simple way. So on page 184 of The Fountain Source of Occultism, he describes our relationship to planetary spheres, the Earth's relationship to beings from different spheres in this way. Every planet intrinsically is a different evolutionary stage and has a different spiritual characteristic from every other planet. I'm going to read that again because sometimes we think that consciousness and creation is determined by planes, but it's determined by planets. So I'm going to read that one more time. And every single planet, whether it be Mars, whether it be Jupiter, whether it be Venus, whether it be a planet we can see over there that we don't know anything about, that planet is of a completely different nature than our own. It's not the same thing. There'll be some things that may overlap because we can perceive it, but it fundamentally is a different kind of life and consciousness. Okay? Every planet intrinsically is a different evolutionary stage and has a different spiritual characteristic from every other planet. Okay, so it's not like we can just go from Earth to all these different worlds and everything's on the same level as us, or everything is the same as the material plane. Every planet stands at its root on its own spiritual plane. So not on the earthly plane, on its own spiritual plane. And during its entire evolutionary course, in its present pilgrimage, that one spiritual plane will remain unaltered. In addition, one planet may be ahead of or behind another in evolutionary time. So I love that because as soon as you get into esoterica, you're not looking at linear time, actually. No, you're not. You're looking at evolutionary time. So when you start getting into other planetary spheres and how they operate and the beings on those spheres, which would be angels, how you actually have to access that information is through the idea of evolutionary time. So not linear time, but you look at it through basically cyclical periods in which the consciousness changes on that planet over a long period of time. That's what you have to look at first. And then from there, you can understand the linear time, but you have to enter into it through the occult knowledge of the cycles, and that every single epoch or every single Manvantara in the Eastern tradition is a different evolutionary cycle where a different quality is developed in the human being, like how in our Lemurian period, the quality of mind emerges. So this is like that for every planet in the solar system and every planet in the universe. It follows the same occult law, or we wouldn't be able to perceive it. So part of all of the stuff in ufology and the New Age about like, oh, we can't figure out what this planet is or what that planet is or what's going on. That's only if you're coming from the most materialist position imaginable. You're handicapped if you try to understand the cosmos from a materialist perspective. You're just not going to get it. You have to start with the esoteric science of the cosmos, because every single human being and every single planet and every single star and everything you see in existence began as an astral form first, and over a long time materialized into physical, and we will once again return to an astral form should we be able to actually cognize and understand how to do that. So we don't start with the material plane because we didn't start as material beings. The planet didn't start as a material thing. So why would we start our analysis there? You don't. Okay. So in other work, you'll also find the same concept being talked about, which is these initiators that come from Venus. And in Dion Fortune's The Cosmic Doctrine, I'll have that book here as well. I'll show it to you. This is my copy here. So this is Dion Fortune's Cosmic Doctrine. And in this book, she describes the same thing that Blavatsky does, the same thing that Rudolf Steiner does, pretty much in her own way. And she calls them the Lords of the Flame. And she goes on to describe other angels like the Lords of Form, which Rudolf Steiner also describes very similar as beings of form. And so when we look at how things were classically perceived, whether it be by Steiner, Blavatsky, Dion Fortune, by Manly P. Hall, by the greats, they had their own way of teaching the same thing about the cosmos. And they're talking about the spiritual hierarchies, which now today, especially since the 1950s, and Ancient Aliens and Von Daniken and Sitchin and this whole movement has now been perverted into something that the only way you can go with it is to worship fallen angels, because that's what they think aliens are. And the reason why they're calling them aliens is so you don't realize that they're just fallen entities. And I'm not describing this from a superstitious, religious, Bible-thumping place. This is the teaching of the spiritual hierarchies, which every single tradition has realized and taught from time immemorial. It's us that is materializing it into these alien beings, which is allowing people to basically start to dress up like they're aliens, or have robots and golems and these weird chimeras start to interact with people saying they're aliens, to bring forward a technological dystopia, because they're showing up in these nuts and bolts ships, right? And a new religion that worships fallen angels and removes Christ and removes the doctrine of resurrection and everything we need to move forward, ultimately leading to the hyper-materialization of humanity, trapped in technology, right? Thinking technology is spiritual, and separating us from the teachings of transcendence, which include Christian mysteries, is the doctrine of resurrection, which is there for all of us to understand and practice just like Christ did, right? So that's esoteric Christianity. Okay. So in esoteric science, we have a description of angels from Venus sacrificing themselves in the Lemurian epoch so that humanity can evolve and develop higher mental capacities. Through this dynamic, we can observe that humanity and the earth is part of a system of spiritual initiation that is embodied by the different planets and the sun of our own solar system. Beings from higher realms operate through the planetary realms that surround our earth. These beings from other planets have an intricate history with humanity and have classically been called angels. This is important. So when you see a physical, the beings are not coming from that physical sphere. That's materialism again. They're coming from the space between the earth and that sphere, which is why so many occultists did not want the heliocentric model and wanted to keep the geocentric model or the Ptolemaic model, was because when you have the geocentric model, it may not represent, how everything is centering around ultimately the sun or the Christ essence, but it does allow the human being to see their own relation to these forces. So there is a value in the geocentric model because every single orbit of every planet, when it's shown as being in relationship to the earth, is the realm in which the angels are from, in a different dimension or a different spiritual plane, if you will. So the physical planet is really just like a little gate or a representation in our realm of a different realm. Okay, and that's why it's important to recognize that. As mentioned, these angels initially came through Venus, which is not a physical planet, but a higher aspect of the Earth itself. All planets are seen as different aspects of the Earth, and humanity's development as different aspects of the Earth and part of humanity's development in occult science. Over time, people began to misinterpret these teachings and think that the angels from Venus were physical beings that came in spaceships. They sacrificed their essence to generate the organs of the human mind, and that is often confused with the creation of the human being. So when the angels basically excarnated or sacrificed an aspect of themselves to create the substrate etherically of what would become the organ of the human mind, people looking back in modern times think, oh, well, that was the creation of humanity, when it was just the creation of an organ within humanity. Many people fall prey to false teachings about the angels and early human development due to a deep memory of our human history that exists within all of us. So when we can't quite, it's like our real true history and real true everything true about spirituality and our development all exists within every single one of us, in our being, in our body, in our consciousness. It's in our astral sheaths. So we can sense and we can feel when something's true. Have you ever had that, when you just know when someone's right or when someone's wrong, and you just get that sense? Or you hear something and you're like, oh my gosh, I've known that the whole time, but I've just never had anybody say it. And now that's clarifying what I always knew to be true. And that's exactly how we operate. And it's beautiful because we have the secrets of the universe inside of us, right? But there's also a danger to it, in that if we don't have the right information, or if the potency isn't there, then we can basically get a little kernel of truth, like beings from another world once came, and we experienced a change in our form and our consciousness, and we can receive an absolute distorted lie about that that's disempowering. If you were to take that ideology to its logical conclusion, it's completely disempowering, right? So it doesn't feel like it's disempowering at the moment, but if you were to take it and evolve it to its logical place, you would find that it's absolutely devastating. But we cling to it because there's that little bit of truth in it. And people will also propagate it who have a natural tendency towards leadership and a natural tendency towards teaching. They naturally do that. And so you have people that will propagate this and become part of the movement, and they don't even mean to be misleading. And this is, I feel like, the situation that we're in. But it can all be remedied through just understanding what really happened in real spiritual science, which empowers everyone. I want to be clear that what I'm talking about today, about people basically dressing up as aliens and saying, showing up in nuts and bolts crafts or perpetuating the alien god ideology and all of this weird alien propaganda, this is not empowering for anyone. It doesn't lead to a good place. It's very dark. It's to bring about a new religion for the Aquarian Age, and also to essentially bring about a technological revolution, which is why they show up in these nuts and bolts crafts and say, oh, this is a secret space program, this is Milabs and military abductions. And it's to get people to basically beg for this technology that apparently the Nazis have, or the Germans have. They want you to beg for it. They want you to beg for them to tell you and disclose to you the secrets of your ancient past. Well, guess what? It's already out there. Everything that you could possibly want to know about Lemuria and Atlantis has been taught and present on this planet for hundreds or thousands of years within mystery school teachings, which is where they're getting it anyway and distorting it. And adding the weird technological element through the alien spaceship, secret space program stuff, which is really about, again, trying to bring about a technological revolution in which an energy crisis is created, right, which is what we're going through now. And then the saviors, we beg for this free energy technology and all these devices to liberate us, but they lock us in an even deeper slavery than we could ever imagine. So we have to be very, very careful now. Okay. So let's get to the next part of this lecture, which is that in the 1950s, spirituality began to change. And so before that, you have Edgar Cayce, and then even before that, at the turn of the century, you have, Alice Bailey, Annie Besant, Rudolf Steiner, you have the Theosophists, the authors I just mentioned, and you have actually a very rich and complete conversation on our beginnings, spiritual initiation, all of that, angels, beings from other spheres, that's all there, right? But then in the 1950s, you start to see all of these topics with the root is the same. So they're talking about angels from Venus, right? But now it's turned into like, hi, I'm a space brother from the planet Venus. Hi, I'm showing up in your backyard in like a spaceship, a nuts and bolts spaceship, and like some blue spandex. And hi, I'm from Venus. See the difference? The Venusian beings, they were angels that were non-physical, that would overlap or overshadow with a human being in order to create an initiatory impulse in the human being. Even when a spiritual being came to the earth as a higher representative of the earth itself, as an angel, they were never the same substance of human beings. They were always a different substance, because every single planetary sphere is its own substance. But there is a little aspect in which it can overlap when a being gets very initiated, and especially if it's a saint or a master that has risen from this plane, they can manifest using this form, like Christ or masters, or what in esoteric Christianity would be saints. Those, because they've ascended from the earth, they can manifest in an earthly form, or if they've gone beyond it, they can take that form. So a lot of understanding this is just human initiation and how and what can manifest and why based on being able to transcend matter. And that's initiation. So in the 1950s, we see basically the teachings of initiation completely fade away. And suddenly the Venusians, the angels from Venus, are aliens, and science fiction takes over, and you get these space brothers that are communicating with people. And the idea of like the space brothers is really where we see what is I don't know why it does that, you guys. I guess it's balloon time. So basically what you get is you get the idea of the space brothers, and that actually slowly as a concept begins to take over the classical position of the Great White Brotherhood, or the saints, or the ascended masters, or the human beings that have transcended matter on the earth, including Christ. So within esoteric science is the science of initiation, which means you can, as a human being, transcend matter. In the Eastern traditions, this is a Buddha, right? Or a Christ bearer. And so these are often called saints. I think that dogmatic Christianity has gone a little crazy naming who the saints are. I don't think every single saint in dogmatic Christianity has ascended matter, but I guess they're good people. And so, but in the true esoteric sense of the word, to be a master, you have to have ascended matter to varying degrees, or be a bodhisattva at least. So eventually we see the rank of human beings that would be known as like the Great White Brotherhood or the Ascended Masters. Suddenly that's now being called Space Brothers. And you have Ashtar Command or Ashtar and all these Venusians that are being portrayed just like Archangel Michael would be, or just like the angels would be, except now they're in spacesuits. And now they're showing up in spaceships. Okay, now they're real people that look like they've been created in the Nazi Lebensborn program. They're like Nordic looking people that are posing as Venusians, that are posing as the Great White Brotherhood, that are posing as angels and redefining themselves as aliens. And this is where we see this whole cosmology begin. So a lot of these contacts that we're going to talk about here that took place in the 1950s to even modern times, it still happens, but not as much as this special time period in like the 50s to the 70s. A lot of them have the same message. And when you start to look at all of the contacts over the last, 70 years, but especially this little period we're going to talk about today, you start to see that all these contacts seem very much the same. And it seems like there is a completely subversive agenda going on to create a spiritual movement that is sort of blended with technology, where technology is often introduced as the initiating factor that humanity has to one day move into being technologically advanced, that humanity evolves through technology. You see this very, very clearly in a lot of the Space Brothers contact. It's not about initiation, really. It's about you have to develop these technologies. Technology is your future. You're going to heal your body through technology. You're going to basically put devices around the sun to absorb it, and you're going to be a god through technology. And that begins right around 1950. And there are other things that they mention as well. So again, they'll oftentimes say, aliens, we are aliens, and we created you. So we have a sort of natural organic authority over you because we actually created you, right? We see that in the 50s, and then that gets picked up by von Daniken and Zachariah Sitchin and Ancient Aliens and Gaia, and becomes an absolute juggernaut that has taken over as a propaganda narrative today. They also say that aliens secretly control the earth and that they're behind every political decision, and that they're in these spaceships and they're telepathically communicating with people. And you still see this today on social media when you have like this picture, you have like a picture of like Donald Trump, and he's sitting there and he's shaking the hand of a Pleiadian, and he's got Val Thor beside him. And this bizarre science fiction thing happens, and you're like, what even is this? This is so weird. But it's popular. It actually is popular to a degree in ufology in the New Age. There's also an aspect of interventionism. And I think that this has sort of faded a little bit because it became really heavily criticized about 10, 15 years ago. And what happens when something that doesn't work as a propaganda narrative is criticized, it usually will drop away. So they'll usually stop doing it because they want to keep the movement going. And you'll see that throughout as well. Certain things will be floated as a trial balloon. They'll see what works, and then they'll drop things or try to redescribe things in a different way that's more favorable. You'll see this with the CIA as well, and with different government aid. They do the same thing. So you can definitely see that in these early contactees that are channeling Venusians and stuff. So there's a savior paradigm that's introduced where these angels are basically now taking the role of the spiritual hierarchies, and they're looking out over you, they're protecting you, and they form this basically United Nations in the sky. And we don't trust our own United Nations, but we trust the alien United Nations in the sky. And they're often called the Galactic Confederacy, the Galactic Federation. And this is just basically saying, instead of looking at the angelic hierarchies as basically a celestial initiation structure, they're just saying these are aliens in a federation. So you can see that there's a core structure of angelic beings called the angelic hierarchies, but they're not a federation flying around in motherships. Like this is the perversion of an already existing occult concept. And also really interestingly, I found this very interesting, is they would also talk a lot in these contacts about environmentalism and climate change. And now that's also been scrutinized, as obviously there are problems with pollution and we have not been treating the earth very well. But there's also groups that are using that reality to create a subversive movement and push people into globalism. So I found it very interesting that a lot of these earlier contacts talk about environmentalism, often to infantilize humanity as well. Like, oh, you can't take care of your own planet, we need to step in, or to really kind of solidify the fact that these aliens are your parents, your child, you can't take care of your own planet. And so it's infantilizing. And that's another thing that you'll see with a lot of these earlier contact experiences, is that the people who are abducted, they're treated like children. And it's not at all an empowering kind of experience where, humanity falls from grace, but then rises. It's part of our evolutionary cycle is to fall and rise. So you wouldn't infantilize people for going through that process, which is exactly what you see these weird contacts doing. And then you see climate change narratives and environmentalism being used by the political left to create control. And it's not really about healing the planet. It's not really about, looking at the acidification of the ocean and stuff like that. It's really about control. And dark groups will use anything to create control, especially sensitive topics like that. Now, the big one that I think is going to be coming into play in the next few years is that most of these contacts also involve the idea of nuclear weapons. The Space Brothers seem rather obsessed with nuclear weapons. And it was probably one of the number one things that these Venusians or the Galactic Federation would talk about repeatedly is nuclear weapons and how they've interfered with them. And to me, when I look at that, I don't so much look at it as what a nuclear explosion is. To me, I look at that as it's mentioned so much and so often. It seems like there's going to be an operation and humanity's being primed for an operation where we see UFOs, a blue beam kind of situation with nuclear weapons, because it is happened so much in these contact experiences. It's definitely something that they've been priming humanity for: UFOs and nuclear weapons. It's something that they hold in their pocket. They want to do something with that. They want to reveal themselves through that. So we have to be very careful that we don't fall into some weird stuff through the alien nuclear weapon line. And again, I've spoken about Black Sun. I've spoken about Mars. I've spoken about nuclear devices, and I talk about an electric apocalypse. I'm not talking about the spiritual aspect of this at all. I'm not saying about whether it's dangerous or not spiritually. I'm saying, because clearly it connects with the eighth sphere. But what I'm saying is that this is something that's going to be used in a dishonest way, and that we have been primed for that, and we have to be careful of it. Now, usually also they will basically regurgitate theosophical teachings. Many of the channeling sessions that I've read for this lecture, and I've been reading for, over a decade now, most of it is just regurgitated, watered down theosophy. So all of these, it's strange, like these are basically aliens, but they're basically just teaching theosophy, often using theosophical terms, the exact wording of like Ledbetter or whatever. You can see the terms that are clearly theosophical terms being used as well. They often use sigil magic by showing someone a symbol that is like the symbol of their, ship or whatever, and tell people to stare at the sigil. That's just basic sigil magic, John D. basic occultism. There's nothing alien about that. There's nothing space age. And that's how it often is it's like, when it really comes down to the esoteric aspect, it's all stuff that we know about. It's all stuff that's already in use. So there's really no reason to think that's off-world, right? I mean, you can if you want, but like, there's no real reason to, because nothing about that is inhuman, right? So also, and I've talked about this quite a bit, usually it always also boils down to Nazi propaganda, or the Nazi origin myth, which is that aliens created humanity, that fallen angels are the great initiators, and generally that's all where this leads. And even looking at the different contacts that we're going to look at today in a moment, you'll find that there is always some kind of weird German secret society influence or some kind of weird Nazi connection. You're not even looking for it, and it's there. And it's to the point where it's getting kind of like tired and exhausting because of how obvious it is that this is the face of what's been going on. The last thing that's often mentioned is, a lot of the time it's very much about Enoch. And just like we're going to come into a period where they're going to use something about aliens and nuclear weapons, I think that there's a deep desire to sort of bring back the Book of Enoch and rewrite the Book of Enoch, and bring forward maybe hidden books that were, squirreled away for this moment, hidden away in Tibet or hidden away in the Vatican basement. There's all these texts that have been hidden away that we have to now read, that are going to rewrite the Bible or rewrite our origin story and create this new religion. So I do think it's going to be around Enoch, and that allows us to get into these fallen angels as well. And so I do think that is another leg of this whole scam, this whole subversive movement that is going on. So be on the lookout for that. And again, I'm not saying that the biblical Enoch is a bad guy. What I'm saying is that there is a kernel of truth and there's a reality, but it becomes subverted and distorted and tainted and profaned due to selfishness and desires to control the world, desires to serve the self. And also just because you read a spiritual text doesn't mean you understand it. You can have an unprepared mind, which means that you can stare and read sacred texts all day long by the most initiated people, and you will not for one moment grasp what they meant. You will read something different because your mind is not prepared. And so when it comes to this topic and it comes to this information, it's really a matter of initiation. It always has been. The lower mind can do mathematics. It can do basic analysis. But that's not the mind in which you read the Bible. That's not the mind in which you read the Bhagavad Gita or the Puranas. That's not the mind in which you read Rudolf Steiner or Blavatsky or any of these things. You have to prepare your mind to be able to understand what's written there. And this has always been the problem, is you get this profaned stream in society that is essentially using these kernels of truth, but in a completely bizarre way. And it becomes spiritually dangerous. And ultimately, we call that the Antichrist stream, ultimately, because the profaned version of it is a complete inversion, essentially. Okay. So those are some of the things that I have noticed these early contacts talked about. Nuclear weapons, warning about those. They're going to shut them off. They're going to appear near them. They're concerned about the nukes. Environmentalism, technology is how you evolve. We're going to give it to you. Even giving people formulas to develop technology. It's bizarre. It's like, you can't have nuclear weapons, but, I'm going to give you this technology so you can develop something else even worse. So it's a weird situation. And so let's get into essentially a contactee that I started to talk about in Angels to Aliens, but didn't really get as deep into it as I wanted to. And that's George Van Tassel. So George Van Tassel is, I think, an example of a contactee, a space brother contactee, whose experience basically encompasses every single contactee of that time. And there were many that followed, again, the same cookie cutter formula. And I think that Van Tassel really encompasses that. So we're going to look at the whole phenomenon through Van Tassel. He's an interesting character to view it through. So you've probably heard of George Van Tassel. You definitely have if you're from California or near Joshua Tree. You've probably heard of him. He is actually a contactee from around 1952. That's when his contact experiences start. So George Van Tassel is very well connected. So George Van Tassel is not just like some farmer, some nobody that's not connected to the government or anything. He's incredibly connected to the government, not only the government, but aerospace, but basically the private contractors today that we will think make UFOs. Lockheed Martin, okay? So, George Van Tassel is a government contractor, and he worked for basically private aerospace companies, which is why this story is such a red flag and such an example of the subversion that has been going on since the 50s. So George Van Tassel is an airline mechanic, and he even describes himself as somebody who would, be experimentally flying these airplanes that they're making in the government, right? And he works for Douglas Aircraft. He works for Howard Hughes, and he works for Lockheed Martin. And he's very open about that in his books. And how he ends up having his contact is that, one day he is basically awoken from his bed and he is contacted by this person that calls himself Solganda. And there's this nuts and bolts, craft that is basically in his backyard. Now, George Van Tassel, his land isn't normal. So he's basically, at that point, he's basically taken over a military airport in the desert. So in around Joshua Tree. So he actually ends up taking over and running a military airport. And he gets this from an individual named Frank Kritzer. And I think that's Critzer. So he acquires this land from Frank Kritzer. Now, this is a strange, it's a strange element because Frank Kritzer was accused of being a Nazi during World War II. So the American government believed that Frank Kritzer was a Nazi, and that he was secretly, communicating with them, and they were watching him. And the land that Frank Kritzer was on, that Van Tassel is now on, is also pretty significant because it actually has underground tunnels that were sacred to the native people there. And they're described as glass-lined tunnels. So there's also this inner earth element that is common in Nazi esoterica, and I talked about it last time in Angels to Aliens, where a lot of what people think are alien beings are actually technically coming just from the earth and from Atlantis. And because they look strangely and they have advanced technology, people think that these are aliens and they're spiritual. And the reality is we already know they have voice to skull technology. We already know that there are technologies in existence that can put messages in your mind. And those are the technologies that are declassified. Imagine the level of mind control or telepathic stuff they have now to give people messages. It's just something we have to seriously look at. So ultimately, George Van Tassel is taking care of this military airport and the land is covered in these ancient tunnel system that the natives find sacred. And Frank Kritzer was basically living in the tunnel systems, and he was kind of like a Jack Parsons in that he was making these contraptions and experiments, and he ends up, dying in a very Jack Parsons way in the desert due to an explosion. And that's when Van Tassel takes over the land and he begins to run the airport. So Van Tassel begins to, after his contact experience with Solganda, who he describes as Venusian, and he also describes Solganda and his bell-shaped craft as being part of the Galactic Federation, which he calls Ashtar's command or Ashtar Command at that point. And they begin to telepathically communicate to him. And they begin to tell him basically the things that I already mentioned about nuclear weapons, about environmentalism, aliens creating humanity. The whole spiel starts to come through as it does. And he begins to distribute these teachings. He begins to make pamphlets and little books, and he begins to sort of become the spiritual teacher. And so why why a lot of people obviously are skeptical of Van Tassel today is because 40 years later, after Van Tassel's talking about this bell-shaped craft landing in his backyard full of all these aliens, this Ashtar command, there's a Polish journalist that ends up discovering classified documents that talk about a Nazi secret weapons program where there is a bell-shaped craft that is created by the Nazis. Now, the name of the journalist is Igor Witowski, and he writes a book called The Truth About the Wonder Weapon. And he describes the Nazi bell, or Die Glocke, and how it was something that the Germans were working on very secretly in part of their program, which would place it at the right time because Van Tassel's having these contacts in the 50s. So technically, you know, it really looks like, when you look at this, it really looks like, you know, are people, I mean, do you have like hidden German secret society that was manifesting through the Nazis that's wanting people to think that they're aliens? You know, that's what the Van Tassel contacts clearly look like when we understand that they had that technology potentially. So Van Tassel also says that it's a time machine, and it's revealed later in Witowski's book that the Nazis also called their Bellcraft a time machine, or that it had these miraculous capabilities and things like that. So I'm going to play you the Van Tassel clip where he describes Solganda and this bell-shaped craft.
But I want to go back to that night in 1953. Tell me, where did this happen for people who haven't heard you talk or seen you yet?
It happened on my airport, which I've operated for the last 16 years, at Giant Rock Airport, 17 miles north of Yucca Valley in California, or 40 miles north of Palm Springs.
Now, this is a private airport for small aircraft, is it?
This is an airport used both by the military and private aircraft.
You own this airport, do you?
I leased this airport from the United States government. I've operated it for 16 years since I retired from the flight test business in the aviation. He awakened me.
This man awakened you?
Well, something awakened me.
So you got up out of your bed?
I got out of my bed and went aboard the ship at his request.
This man, in what language did he converse with you?
He talked to me in the best English equivalent to Ronald Coleman.
And he met you there, and he said, what did he say, come with me to my ship, or what?
No, he said, I asked him what he wanted, because we have a lot of people who come in stuck in the sand and broken axles and whatnot. And I asked him what he wanted, and he said, my name is Solganda, and I would be pleased to show you our craft.
Solganda?
Solganda.
Was the craft visible to you at this time?
It was. When he stated this, I saw beyond him the ship, which I hadn't seen before.
What did you see?
A bell-shaped type of anti-gravity ship that they operate as a scout ship out of their big carriers.
How big?
This was 36 feet in diameter and 19 feet high.
And where was it, on the ground?
No, it was hovering 10 feet off the ground.
And how did you go into this ship?
I walked with him to a spot underneath it, and an anti-gravity beam took me up through a hole in the bottom of it.
You're telling me at 2 o'clock in the morning in Giant Rock Airport, you walked underneath this hovering ship, and whammo, you went up inside.
No, you didn't go whammo. You went just about as slow as a local elevator run.
And when you got off the anti-gravity elevator, what did it look like?
I was inside of a ship about 18 feet in diameter and roughly 10 feet high to the domed ceiling, and there were 3 men on the ship, besides the one that had got off and invited me aboard.
You keep calling them man. What do you mean, man?
Well,
little green man?
They were about 5'6". They came about to my eyebrows, and they could have walked in our clothes down any of our streets, and we wouldn't have paid any attention to them.
So there you have it. The bell-shaped craft lands in Van Tassel's backyard, And he begins his religion where he proselytizes the Space Brothers and all of these alien narratives. All right, which really become the foundation. And, you know, Van Tassel's Ashtar command becomes a formula for the Galactic Federation, for the Galactic Confederation, or all these different spin-offs. That comes from Van Tassel and then Scientology. That's where that begins. Now, you could say that the impulse itself could be, you know, a kind of stream of information that people are tuning into from dark entities or whatever, some kind of entity or something. But the first time we see that, and this is just the reality, is through Scientology and through Van Tassel. That is where we see the Galactic Federation begin. And now there are thousands of people that apparently channel the Galactic Federation or some version of it. And Scientology is based around the Galactic Federation. It is a space soap opera religion. You know, the very top of it, as we're going to see moving later into this lecture, is a space alien cult. So it might be funny for some people to laugh at, but this is actually really serious. It has captured a lot of people, and a lot of good people, a lot of well-meaning people. Okay, so the other situation that is fascinating with Van Tassel is that Van Tassel actually predicts the buzzing of the White House. So in 52, what ends up happening is in July, 7 UFOs, or 7 unidentified flying objects, begin to buzz the White House and fly around Washington, D.C. and make this incredible display around the White House, almost like a show of dominance, right? And the crazy thing about Van Tassel is that he predicted it, and he has, he says in his book, he describes the prediction of how that was the Ashtar command that did that. And I'll actually just read it to you. So in I Rode in a Flying Saucer in 1952, this is the publication. It's his book called I Rode a Flying Saucer. On page 20, he says, on April 6th in 1952, the Ashtar command said to him, "Your Pentagon will soon have much to muddle over. We are going to give this globe a buzz. I hope they do not intercept us from the front. Our authority has ordered us to maintain contact through you." So this is the Ashtar command telling Van Tassel telepathically, allegedly, that in April, that they are soon going to buzz the White House. And Van Tassel ends up taking this prediction and actually sending it to the Pentagon, and actually receives a receipt letting him know that the Pentagon had actually received this warning that Van Tassel gave them, and that they received the warning before it actually happened. So according to Van Tassel and his documents, he warns Washington that these aliens are going to be buzzing the White House before it happens. And then, of course, we see that in July, that exact thing happens. And there are some people who believe that this is like Pleiadians that are making themselves known. I still hear this as being described as, you know, spiritual beings that made themselves known. But is that really what happened? Or is this basically a Nazi secret society, or a German, what was once a German Nazi secret society that has this advanced technology that is actually threatening and doing a show of power? Is that really what's going on? Because if you look at the Van Tassel work, that is definitely suggested. So there's this push-pull in the field of ufology in the New Age where there's an awful lot of people that think genuine scams are spiritual beings. And when that happens and it's not analyzed properly, it's really bad for spirituality, because there are spiritual beings, there are angels, there are masters. And when we think that something is, a spiritual entity when it's not, that harms your spirituality, because you don't have a clear picture of what's going on. So by me going through these contacts and being critical of them, I'm not being critical of spirituality. I'm not being critical of beings from other worlds. I love that. I'm saying that we need to delineate the subversive group that flies around in basically advanced technology to us, that has this other thing that they're doing, which involves trying to portray as though they're alien gods in order to create a new religion. That's what I'm talking about. And that is separate from the teaching of the angels and higher beings and initiation. All that is beautiful and powerful, but it deserves to be preserved and taught properly without this bizarre stuff. And quite frankly, I'm going to be honest, this is the thing that I like to talk about the least. The reason why I talk about it is because, if you want to talk about the inner earth, if you want to talk about black sun, if you want to talk about moon, if you want to talk about spiritual topics, there's so many bizarre and inverted information on it that it becomes hard to talk about unless we address and separate it out. So, okay, let's carry on with the story of Van Tassel and the Ashtar Command and the sort of subversive things and shows of power, and I think a push to create a religion that is behind this. So in the 70s, more and more people start to channel aliens, have these, telepathic contact with aliens. More and more people are being abducted, and aliens are being seen as spiritual entities, and angels are being seen as something separate. So we're getting this weird division and misunderstanding of the cosmos and human initiation really sinking in by the 70s. And you see also UFO culture emerging and UFO cults emerging. And one of the things that happens with Ashtar and the Galactic Federation is that in 1977, apparently, allegedly, the Galactic Federation hacks into a television program. And so essentially at 5 p.m. Sunday, November 26th in 1977, the Galactic Federation hacks the TV station in southern England. And this representative that's called Vrillion, who's a representative of the Ashtar Galactic Command, starts to talk to people through the TV. And it's spooky, it gets fuzzy, and there's like this pulsating that's going on. And, Vrillion says that they are guiding humanity and that they're watching over us, and that humanity's coming to a difficult period of evolution in the Aquarian age. And he says that we have to lay down our nuclear weapons or our weapons of evil. And we need to prepare for the age of Aquarius. And then he kind of disappears. And so this is another situation that's kind of similar to like the buzzing of the White House, where you obviously have some kind of subversive, like that's not an alien. Like we're going to watch the clip here. And this is not an alien. Okay, this is not the Galactic Federation from Tau Ceti or the Pleiades or whatever that has hacked into that TV screen. That is a person. This is a group that wants you to think and people to think that there are spiritual aliens out there. That's what is going on here, which is sick. Okay. So it's funny and everything, but it's also very sick. Okay, this is an agenda. This is a subversive agenda to create a religion and a technological revolution. So let's get in and listen to Vrillion from the Ashtar command.
War, allowing Giroux to take part in negotiations, being arrested. In Australia, Mr. Kerry Packer's cricketers are still pleased about yesterday's High Court decision, which lifts the ban on them playing in Test matches.
This is the voice of Allah, representative of the Ashtar Galactic Command, speaking to you. For many years you have seen us as lights in the skies. We speak to you now to service them as we have done to your brothers and sisters all over this, your planet Earth. We come to warn you of the destiny of your race and your world so that you may communicate to your fellow beings the course you must take to avoid the disaster which threatens your world and the beings on other worlds around you. All your weapons of evil must be removed. The time for conflict is now past, and the race of which you are a part may proceed to the higher stages of its evolution, if you show yourselves worthy to do this.
We understand that viewers in some parts of the region are receiving a breakthrough in sound. We're sorry about this, and we're doing our best to rectify the fault.
Wow, great. Thanks, Ashtar, for that. So you'll notice that in the hacking there is some images that are kind of pushing through the screen. And one of the things it is actually a Bugs Bunny cartoon that's called The Falling Hare. So what's fascinating about this cartoon is that it actually has to deal with nuclear weapons, and there's a lot of occult underpinnings in this cartoon. So the cartoon was created in 1943, and essentially Bugs Bunny is working at a secret military base where there's basically atomic bombs. And there's this little gremlin who is basically terrorizing Bugs Bunny, and he's doing like the horned god sign as he's talking. And he also hijacks a plane. So the gremlin basically hijacks this plane and flies it into Twin Towers, which is very disturbing when you think about what happened, much later in New York. And the hare is an incredibly occult symbol as well. It's a symbol of Venus, actually, and it is a symbol of Q, of the letter Q. So the falling hare is, it's really chilling that it is shown sort of during this weird Ashtar command hacking. So I'm actually going to play you guys a couple little snippets from the falling hare now.
What's all the hubbub? Bub?
These blockbuster bombs don't go off unless you hit them just right.
Yeah?
Yeah.
So that's the falling Hare. That is the clip that, or the show that basically was overlapping with the Ashtar command hack, which I find to be rather disturbing. So I couldn't talk about the alien religion and the Galactic Federation and the alien god ideology and all of that without doing a mention of L.Ron Hubbard. So actually, L.Ron Hubbard talks about the Galactic Federation, which he actually calls the Galactic Confederacy of Lucifer, or the Markabian Confederacy back in the 40s. And he is just hell-bent on creating a religion. He has, interestingly, ties to Jack Parsons, who ends up becoming, the scientific end of the space god thing, which is NASA and now SpaceX. So it's interesting to me that it's almost like L.Ron Hubbard takes over the kind of New Age spiritual portion of the alien god narrative. And then Jack Parsons takes over the sort of scientific NASA practical space god religion, because when you look at NASA and now SpaceX, there's incredible ceremonial underpinnings to it. I mean, the cosmos in space is probably the most ceremonially significant thing we can reference. I mean, look at how temples are built, look at astrology, all of that. So you cannot say that NASA is not a spiritual organization, and they use Masonic symbols. And I mean, the story goes on and on with NASA, which began through Jack Parsons, who was a colleague really of Hubbard. So Hubbard goes on to basically create, and really, honestly, a lot of the New Age is basically just Scientology. The cosmic side of the New Age is very much like L.Ron Hubbard. I was listening to these lectures that he gave where he's describing cat people and, grays and bases on Mars, and all of that is what we're dealing with today. And so, Scientology is also, what was coming through Scientology is also this Galactic Federation narrative. And essentially Xenu, which is like the big laughing joke of Scientology now, Xenu was actually a commander of the Galactic Federation. And again, according to L.Ron Hubbard, the Galactic Federation of Light is really the Galactic Federation of Lucifer. So Lucifer means light, and light is like a code name for Lucifer, because Lucifer was a flame bearer. He was an angel. And the flame bearers are symbolized as the sons of fire, or the lords of the flame. Now, so that is a code word in the occult for Lucifer. So we see L.Ron Hubbard admit that. Also, when you see all these contacts that are basically Venusians, like Adamski and Van Tassel and Howard Menger, and like we're going to get into Thor and all of that. I mean, this is also a reference esoterically and ceremonially to Lucifer, to fallen angels, going all the way back to the Garden of Eden and the angels of Venus that fell, not the ones that graduated, but the ones that fell and that seek to enter human bodies and control the earth. So basically, Scientology is a big old alien religion about the Galactic Federation of Light, or the Galactic Federation of Lucifer. And L.Ron Hubbard even claims, he actually was making these amendments, and he claimed himself to be the incarnation of Lucifer. So he actually said that he was Lucifer and therefore the leader of the Galactic Federation. He is like the Xenu of his day, according to himself. So, oh, and the other really interesting thing about Scientology and L.Ron Hubbard is that he says that eventually part of the second coming is going to be basically this contact with this Galactic Federation and these aliens. And it's going to trigger a series of destructive events and basically a new Earth. And that's exactly what I hear in the New Age. And that's fine if people want to believe that, but I mean, it is from Scientology. Like, this is where that belief comes from, and it is channeled by L.Ron Hubbard. So, the level in which you have to reach to learn about Xenu and to learn about the Galactic Federation of Lucifer is basically OT8. And OT8 is, I think, the highest or one of the highest levels of Scientology, and people pay millions of dollars to discover this. So you basically pay millions of dollars to discover the Galactic Federation of Light and Lucifer and all of this bizarre information. And so obviously when people were getting to that level, they were quitting, they were completely weirded out. And that's how these OT8 documents got revealed, was that people were like, I want my money back because this is crazy. So I'm going to read to you where in the L.Ron Hubbard Scientology documents they talk about the Galactic Confederacy. Okay. No doubt you are familiar with the Revelation section of the Bible, where various events are predicted. Also mentioned is a brief period of time in which the archenemy of Christ, referred to as the Antichrist, will reign and his opinions will have sway. All this makes for very fantastic, entertaining reading, but there is truth to it. This Antichrist represents the forces of Lucifer, literally the, quote, light bearer or light bringer, unquote. Lucifer being a mythical representation of the forces of enlightenment, the Galactic Confederacy. My mission could be said to fulfill the biblical promise represented by this brief Antichrist period. During this period, there is a fleeting opportunity for the whole scenario to be effectively derailed, which would make it impossible for the mass Markabian landing, or the Galactic the alien landing and the big alien reveal, which he calls the second coming, to take place. The second coming is designed, among other things, to trigger a rapid series of destructive events. So that's the highest echelon of Scientology, and that to me sounds a lot like what's channeled in the New Age. It sounds a lot like even where people end up going with the idea of the secret space program and how all of these advanced Nazi technologies exist, and we just have to beg them to give us these free energy devices and these healing devices that are kept in the secret space program. We have to beg for them, and we're going to go through this energy crisis so that we receive them, and the aliens created humanity and Enoch, and this whole religion forms from that. And clearly it's been either directly planned by some very sick people like L.Ron Hubbard for a long time, or they're channeling something that is coming from fallen beings, or both, right? So, but this is definitely a phenomenon. And listening to that, you may think, well, that's interesting, but, is anyone with any credibility saying anything? Like, there's just this weird guy named Van Tassel in the desert living on some tunnels, and, you've got, the Ashtar hacking, and you've got L.Ron Hubbard, but is there anyone of any actual authority or standing that talks about the Galactic Federation and perpetuates the alien god ideology? Obviously there is. And today we're going to talk about one of these people that is incredibly credentialed, incredibly respected in the world, that also has been trying to push this alien god stuff, push the Galactic Federation, and push this whole thing forward. And that individual is Haim Eshad. And Haim Eshad, in 2016, around there, starts talking about the Galactic Federation. Now, for those of you who don't know, Haim Eshad is the space minister for Israel. And he was the space minister for Israel for 30 years. He was a decorated general, a decorated Israeli general. He has received awards and accolades for his work. And according to him, he has this elaborate description of the Galactic Federation and how they're holding back revealing themselves to us because we're not ready. But again, they're guiding us secretly. And the Galactic Federation, according to Eshad, has prevented several nuclear holocausts. And we really owe our survival to this Galactic Federation of aliens, because they've prevented us from basically nuclear disaster so many different times. So here we're seeing the nuclear thing and we're seeing the savior thing again right away. And he also says, you know, he has a very cold scientific description of religion and spirituality and the cosmos, and says that humanity and Earth are basically just a petri dish. And we are helpless and powerless to these aliens that do these experiments on us. And according to Haim Eshad, you know, we know God through numbers, and we know God through mathematics and knowledge. So there's that Luciferian underpinning there, where, and also an Armanic underpinning, where Lucifer tells you basically that all you have to do is have the knowledge, like self-knowledge or knowledge, and you can be perfected God being. And then Ahriman says that you can know God through the material world and through numbers. So it is interesting to me that from the anthroposophical perspective, you see both of these elements very strongly in this material. It's almost like they combine into this weird scientific, technological space cult, with Lucifer as the light essence instead of Christ, which is Christ being the true impulse of evolution in humanity, the Christ impulse and the being Christ. So he also says that, he also mentions Black Sun tech and portals and things like this. And he says that Trump knows about the Galactic Federation, and he was almost ready to release it, I think before his presidency or during it, but that Trump apparently held back because, you know, the world isn't ready for it yet. And I can't help but think about, you know, with the whole political right and the Trump faction, that through the political right, we're going to see, obviously, we would see a relief in a lot of the degeneracy that comes through the political left and the sickness that's on the political left. But the political right also has its own sickness, which I think is an obsession with technology. And I think that the Armonic technological impulse is going to come through the right, the political right. So in one sense, we get a relief from one aspect. We have to be very careful with Elon Musk, and I think the Trump or the right faction, in bringing forward this like technological revolution that I'm talking about so much here. And this is through, I think, the guise of these freedom cities that Trump has talked about in the past, and almost the introduction of all of this technology. And Dark Journalist has mentioned about the connection between Trump and Tesla in his Trump Tesla and the time capsule video. So there's this whole thing about the political right and Trump with kind of potentially bringing in actually these technologies that are supposed to liberate us, but they don't. They actually own all the patents for them. They control them, and they would put us under more control than we could ever imagine. So in other words, politically right now, we have a very delicate process that we have to go through in order to choose the lesser of evils to get to a place, hopefully, that is liberating for us, because there's a lot of problems with the political right that we have to look out for. We can't look at any side as a savior, okay? So I am going to, also he talks about bases on Mars, and the Mars piece is under talked about. It's underrepresented because it's very likely that they'll use Mars and the Mars origin myth as part of this if we're not careful. So I'm going to play you guys a clip from the Israeli news station that is talking about how Haim Eshad knows about the Galactic Federation. No different than Van Tassel, it's the same stream.
All right, moving on. Break out the theremin, because this next story is just begging for a spooky sci-fi background. After 30 years at the helm of the Israeli space security program, and after receiving 3 Israeli security awards, retired Israeli general and respected professor Haim Eshad is now unveiling that yes, there are aliens among us, yes, Israel has made contact with them, and no, humanity is not ready for them. Also, before you start doubting his words, the 87-year-old Eshad was clear in his recent interview with Yediot Ahronot News that he's not talking about immigration, but rather about a galactic federation complete with an underground base on Mars, where there are American and alien representatives apparently present. He also explains that President Trump both knows about them and was on the verge of disclosing their existence, only to be persuaded not to by the Federation, in order to avoid mass hysteria and panic here on Earth. Apparently, humanity just still has a long way to grow before we can understand the gravity of their presence. The final question, however, is what do they want? But perhaps thankfully for us, Eshad says that it's essentially just to research and understand the fabric of the universe.
So there we go. I think what happens is that there's a certain group that's very desperate to have this narrative stick or something like it. And what they'll do is they'll float these trial balloons and they'll have somebody mention it, and then they'll observe to see how people talk about it. They'll absolutely scavenge and copy YouTubers and creators and reporters, and they'll often kind of steal their information or take what's popular, try to add that in there to create one big propaganda golem thing. And that's what I see happening here as well with Haim Eshad, is that they're floating a trial balloon to see how people react, because they really do want to create this redefining of the human origin story and this alien god religion, and they also want to introduce this technological dystopia through the ufology movement, which is why you see the TTSA and all these different whistleblowers that just so happen to be from deep 3-letter agencies and connected with private contractors, or they want to become a contractor and they want to make all of these aerospace devices. It's always like, we're going to disclose the secret of UFOs and create them and release all these free energy devices, which sounds great, but we have to go a lot deeper on why they're doing this and also what these devices truly are. Because if it's genuinely a free energy device, you can't really have that, because they end up basically augmenting whatever human consciousness is at the time. So there's a reason why there are literal spiritual devices or devices that pierce into the etheric plane that are not being used. It's because it affects the consciousness of humanity. Of course it does. So there is no technology that can be released that doesn't affect consciousness that's going to be like a spiritual technology. It doesn't exist. It's going to affect human consciousness, which is why a lot of these technologies have been shelved. And even Rudolf Steiner's mentioned this, Dr. Journalist has mentioned this. So it's not that they don't exist, it's that they're certainly not going to be released by certain initiates that have them. because again, if you turn them on, it ends up compounding whatever consciousness that humanity has. And if we're of a very low consciousness, it makes it very difficult to get higher, actually. So this is one of the problems with the energy struggle, is that there's also other kind of technologies. There's lots of different kinds of things going on. But what I really want to mention today is that there is a group that is, technology is part of their religion. They talk to entities through it. They've been creating technology as basically like golems to summon entities into, fallen angels into, and dark entities into. So here we are thinking innocently that we're looking at like AI or these liberating devices that are going to make our life easier. And it's actually like a religion for these people. But because humanity is so far behind, we don't see that, because most people are so innocent and thinking that like they're not thinking that like there's occult things that can happen with technologies, and entities can enter into the technology through electricity, through magnetism, and especially even through atomic stuff. So there's a whole kind of modern esoterica that's specifically about technology that involves basically dark occult things that nobody really talks about or knows about. But one group is really into and wants to release that upon humanity as though it's a liberating moment. And when we have the energy crisis, when we're starving, when we're being torn apart through war, we just may fall for it. But not if we are educated. And this whole thing about like that I've been seeing as well, I'll mention, this is something that Alex Jones has tried to push, that Elon Musk has been trying to push, and a lot of people are trying to push, that's just not reality, is that there's this battle going on for AI. No. AI has already been developed. All of these technologies are hundreds, not thousands of years ahead of where we think they are. So these have already been developed in private labs, through private companies already. They don't bring something out and have it be a real trial, like we're creating this together. No. Okay. They've been studying, look at the Macy conferences where they were already studying cybernetics in the 20s, 30s, 40s, in the Macy conferences. They've been on this for a very long time. They've already reached a certain level of perfection, and they're creating this battle where it looks like these different people are fighting. That's so that, one is just accepted, and we think that we have to go along with it. You don't. This has been the problem consistently with humanity, is that the military-industrial complex or these different private companies will take technologies, often that were originally publicly funded, and they'll develop them behind the scenes, and they'll become way ahead. And then they completely get control of it, and then they reintroduce it at like a basic level. They're like, look what we did, we're discovering it now. And it's not reality. They've already been developing the AI. They've already been developing certain devices and things. They're already at a very advanced level. They're just at the point where they're going to start pretending like they're inventing it to us. Okay, we have to grasp that, because unfortunately, I think a lot of the alternative media is captured as well. And it is like being funneled right now into a future that we need to be more critical of, especially when it comes to these technologies. So I'm going to go into a few more bizarre contacts here, where basically people were dressed up as aliens, often speaking with a German accent, like abducting people. We're going to get into a few more of those cases. But I want to let you know now that I'm going to be taking questions from members only today. So if you want to take part in the Q&A, go on to gigiyoung.com, sign up for premium, and you'll be able to get your question in, and I will disappear from YouTube and Facebook and Rumble, and I will be only streaming for the last hour or so on my private platform. So if you want to be part of that, sign up now, and I'll see you over there for the question period. Okay, so there were so many accounts of contactees and of abductions that were obviously people or were robots or were even potentially some kind of chimera or something going on. And it's incredible how many people believe that these were aliens. And actually, I'm talking about myself because for a long time, I believed that this was an alien thing, and that these were genuinely beings from like other planets and stuff. But when I really went back and looked at it, now that I'm older and more well-read and I think more spiritually connected, a lot of abduction cases, there's nothing about them that suggest that this ship or this person or this like robot thing is from another planet. It is just either a spiritual experience that people have in their astral. So many abductions are literally an astral experience, which would be classically termed as an astral experience. But it gets called alien for some reason. There's nothing physical about it. It's literally somebody being taken out of their body astrally, which would often be called a demonic encounter or an angelic encounter, depending on the forces that are working with you or around you. So that's what that was always called. And then just because there's advanced technology, that also does not mean that this person's from the Pleiades, right? There's plenty of different technologies, as I mentioned earlier, that literally are telepathy technologies. The most crude of which is the voice to skull technology, where they can literally put a voice in someone's head. And that is actually an older technology. Imagine what Andrea Puharich, who also had this Israel connection, he had the alien connection, channeling the nine, the nuclear stuff he was talking about too. Andrea Puharich, associated also with MK Ultra, was putting implants in people's teeth in the 70s to make them hear things and make them get impressions. So, in other words, things that we have to be honest and say, you know, a lot of these things that people think are spiritual experiences, they could be created by technology, right? And that could also overlap with the astral plane. Astral entities can enter into technology. They can enter into electricity because electricity is the medium of the etheric plane. So they can come through a lower astral existence into the etheric, and they can come in through electricity. They can enter into technology. They can enter into people because people are electric beings. This is basic occultism. So we have to be like, you know, just because you get a voice in your head or just because you get a spiritual insight does not mean that that's a spiritual being. I'm sorry. It is unfortunate. It could be a technology, which is why we have to have a meditation practice. You have to learn how your bioenergetic field feels. You have to learn how to connect with yourself through spiritual development, through meditation, so that you can feel whether something's real or not. If you're always disassociated, if you don't have a spiritual practice, really, you become very vulnerable. So I can't get into today on ways to protect yourself from this or understand this. I'm sorry about that. I have lots of content on my channel where I do get into that. But essentially, the more you know yourself, the stronger spiritual practice you have, that becomes impossible. So you can make it so in your life. It's very unlikely or impossible for these forces to get through if you are at a certain level of initiation, if you have certain spiritual practices that you take on. And it is possible to see them. It is possible to have clear sight and to not be manipulated. There's usually, we're never perfect, okay? But we can get to a point where it becomes more and more obvious when there are manipulations, which we have to admit that there are. And we have to admit that these could be coming from technologies, okay? So these are encounters that actually become kind of popular. That, in my opinion, these are not aliens. These are people dressed up as aliens in costumes, basically, that are landing in people's backyards and trying to like indoctrinate them into this weird religion. Like that's what's going on. It's a subversive event. So the first one that comes to mind where the contactees were basically like, it's not really necessarily an alien, it's a Nazi, or it's a person at the very least, was Betty and Barney Hill. Now, Betty and Barney Hill were a couple that were on their way home, and they were driving on a country road in New England, and basically they get abducted. And it becomes one of the most famous abduction cases. And I think even Obama made a Netflix documentary on the Betty and Barney Hill case. And so while Barney Hill was describing his abductors, he actually said that they looked like they were military agents, and that they reminded him of Germans, and that they were speaking a language that to him sounded German. And mind you, this is like in, I think, the 60s or so, or the 50s. So there isn't this massive Nazi esoteric scene that there is today through Gaia and Sitchin and things like that. This is before that. That's why this is significant. And so Barney says this, and this is from his own account. He looks like a German Nazi. He's a Nazi. A black scarf around his neck, dangling over his left shoulder. Okay, so that's how Barney Hill describes his abduction experience. And now there's other things in that abduction experience, like Junior, and the star map and things like that. And that always exists with these things too. There's always some kind of religious element, and that is quite honestly, I think, part of the psyop. The next one is Adamski. And now Adamski is another person who had this Venusian contact, and he actually had deep connections to the CIA. And it turns out people from the CIA, I actually think it was Angleton, but I'm not sure, were protecting him. And he even said something to someone that he had to do this alien thing. And so there's aspects of the Adamski work that connect back to three-letter agencies. It's the Venusian element, just like Van Tassel, which is the Lucifer element. Venus is Lucifer in a steganography sense. And he says that Adamski says that he actually heard the Venusians speaking German. Now, I know a little bit about the angels from Venus, and I don't think any of them spoke German. I think Germans speak German. So this was a really interesting aspect to Adamski that, again, comes up in a lot of these contact experiences. The next contactee was someone named Everett Clark. Now, Everett Clark was living in Dante, Tennessee, and he basically sees all of these lights appearing in this field behind his house. And according to his account, and this is early too, this is around the 50s or 60s, and according to his account, he starts to see these people get out of this craft in this field in his backyard, and they start trying to chase his dog. And he says that he hears them speaking German. So again, this is before a lot of the Nazi esoterica really became mainstream. This was like in the 50s and 60s. So another contact that goes pretty much in a very similar vein as the first three that I've mentioned already, Barney Hill, Adamski, and Everett Clark, is Reinhold Schmidt. Now, Reinhold Schmidt is from Bakersfield, California, but he ends up seeing, I believe, a cigar-shaped craft while he's in Nebraska. And according to him, this cigar-shaped craft lands, and it appears as though these people get out of it, according to him. And there were 4 men and 2 women. and they start working on this cigar-shaped craft that just lands in this field in Nebraska. And he said that they were Venusian. This is what they called themselves. And he said that he heard them talking amongst themselves. He heard the crew of the cigar-shaped craft talking amongst themselves in High German, what he called High German. So I think that, again, today people would say, like, oh, this is just like the Nazis and the secret space program, and the Nazis are on the moon, and the Nazis are on Mars, and the Nazis are on Tassel, and they have this miraculous technology that allows them to time travel, and the Nazis are basically like these technological gods, and now we have to beg them for this technology because we're so in trouble in our culture. So please give us this technology so we can have it ourselves. So this is the play, right? You know, because I also see this idea that, like, of the secret space program, and also of military abductions and things like this. But a lot of that just leads straight into a new religion and straight into the technological revolution, because what it does, it starts leaking the idea that there's a new origin myth by talking about it, and leaking the idea that there's all these incredible technologies that could solve all of our problems. And so it's what a lot of these contact experiences are doing. And I think Gaia and all the people that propagate this particular SSP, Milabs, space Nazi narrative is, I think it's really, again, it's to create this desire and to get people to beg for the technology and to beg for this new origin story. And this is what I think is behind it. So that's also why we're seeing the controlled demolition of our freedoms and of, you know, basically everything, is so that we do beg for this. And we've been told about it forever. And this is why this is going on. This is just my opinion. This is just my analysis. You probably have your own, but that's, in my opinion, this is a huge element of why this narrative is so popular. So obviously, the next contactee that I had to include was Howard Menger. And he also was in contact with the Venusians, okay? And the Venusian that he said was his contact was called Valiant Thor, or Val Thor. And according to him, Val Thor meets with Eisenhower. So here you have, again, the aliens are making political deals. They're wheeling, they're dealing, they're behind every movement, they're behind everything secretly. So we should worship them and trust them, and whatever they say goes, kind of thing. They're more powerful than us. They're parental figures, right? And so, again, like in classical spirituality, there is no entity that is wheeling and dealing politically. There is no entity from the cosmos that is greater than you, okay? I mean, okay, I'll rephrase that. It's not that is like going to control you. Obviously, there's a structure of initiation, and there are beings that are more initiated than human beings, but they're not going to come in and start controlling the political system and doing things like that, because how angels and spiritual beings help other beings evolve in the solar system, or how they help humanity, is actually by overlapping them. And so a bodhisattva is someone with an angel or an archangel that's overshadowing their being and merging with them, or that's like our higher self. So how real angels interact with humanity is not through taking these authoritative moves, like talking to the president, or like, you know, landing in your backyard, these material, that's not how angels work. Angels work through humanity, and they don't interfere. So when you start to see all these like aliens that are apparently like interfering with politics, and they are, you know, behind the scenes with the chosen people, this is not real. This is some weird propaganda. This is fallen angel behavior. Like, this is not how higher beings work with humanity and create evolution, is through empowering the individual, through empowering you, and to bring you healing, to help you through connecting with higher beings like angels and Christ. We learn to be like them, and we, through our own will, transform ourselves in that image. So it's completely through the individual, through us, that we change the world, not through these weird aliens that are apparently interfering. There is something called the spiritual hierarchy, which I've already mentioned earlier, that are angels. And these angels have specific roles in creation and specific roles in the mind of humanity. But again, these are not physical beings. These are in a different dimension. These are in different spiritual planes that are associated with planetary spheres. And so you can see how there is a truth that angels will protect you. You know, if you have your guardian angel, and this angel will protect you in your life from things that you don't need to experience, right? You have angels that protect group souls, like archangels, the zeitgeist. So you do have some level of, I guess you could say, interference from spiritual beings, but it's not taken to the extent that this alien stuff takes it. Because ultimately how humanity evolves is through an inner connection with God, with Christ within, that eventually transforms you and you become like them. So this is where the red flags are in a lot of the stranger material. So Howard Menger like has a backyard party with Val Thor. I have to say one more thing. So technology also cannot transform a body into a higher dimension. The only way a body can go truly beyond time and space and into a higher dimension is through transubstantiation, which is the mystery of resurrection, or the doctrine of resurrection. That is how you basically transubstantiate your physical form into a glorified etheric or astral body, and you overcome matter. So you actually become a different quality of being. A machine cannot do that. So a lot of this technological religion is to convince you that a machine can bring you anywhere in time to any star system. That is trying to take the role of resurrection away from humanity. And resurrection, the resurrection mysteries are just the transubstantiation of your not just, but I have to be brief. It's actually a much deeper process of initiation to no longer have to incarnate in the material world. And what you find with the alien god ideology and this weird technological religion is it's about trapping you in the material world, because there's no real teachings about resurrection and about Christ. So it's a trap. It's a trap. And so you see also with Valiant Thor, you also see that Valiant Thor is apparently bringing all these scientists, these formulas for technologies. This is one of the things that Valiant Thor does, because Valiant Thor apparently wants to, get humanity up to speed with the aliens, which is probably just these weird breakaway civilization from Atlantis and the Earth that wants to control. I mean, that's really what's going on. So Valiant Thor is apparently giving all these, like scientific formulas to the government to build devices. So again with the technology, and again with the Nazi stuff. I mean, Valiant Thor is basically a reference to the Germanic god of thunder, right? The swastika is known as Thor's hammer. So always with Venus, always with the Nazi esoterica stuff, always with the technology and Enoch and the fallen angels, it's always the same religion that's just being, brought forward as though it's totally earnest something else. But that's what lies beneath. That's the creature that's beneath. So that's Val Thor and Howard Menger, The other thing that happens is there's a lot of abductions as that are totally like it's people are describing not an alien, but they're describing a robot. Now, could a robot be an alien? Like, I guess so, but why are we going to the extraterrestrial hypothesis when we have the ability to create that ourselves? And that's the other ideological error here, is that we keep going to like the extraterrestrial hypothesis all the time, when in reality, we have the technology to create advanced crafts, right? A lot of people have seen them. We have the ability to create cyborgs, to create robots, to create chimeras. You know, you can have technologies that enhance your ability to interface with minds. You can have incredibly gifted people that can astrally project and things like this. A lot of the stuff that we're thinking is alien has a reasonable explanation within the occult systems that are earthly that we already understand. So calling everything extraterrestrial, everything alien, it's literally just to hide the reality that a lot of this is to bring forward a very dark agenda, and they can't directly say what it is. So it's alien, it's extraterrestrial. There's nothing new under the sun. I've even seen people trying to describe, like, you know, the alien, the gray alien likes to interface with the consciousness and enters the body. That's possession. So everything that is sort of described in like a space alien way or like a technological way, it's just already a concept that exists in esoteric understanding. It's just now it's there might be a technology involved, or like now it's an alien, but it's literally already exists. Okay, so I think we're gonna round this out now. And a lot of this, I'll just briefly mention the Milabs thing and a little bit more into the secret space program. So a lot of people, again, will see physical people, you know, acting as aliens, and they're like, oh, this is because there is this breakaway faction that's the Nazis, and they're super superior, they're hyper superior to everyone else, and all this kind of stuff. And again, this is just to create a technological dystopia. So we beg for that technology, and we beg for this new origin myth. So that's where a lot of the secret space program stuff comes in, and the Milabs and all that. It's basically to get us talking about advanced technology. And a lot of ufology, which is why the ufology scene is so rife with three-letter agencies and the doties of the world, and people who are so like grifty, and there's so much control over it, is because for the people who are controlling the subversive operation, ufology for them is about advanced technology, because it's them that have been in the sky most of the time anyway. So for the people who are controlling and dressing up as aliens and trying to create a new religion, ufology, the field of ufology for them is about advanced technology. That's what that field is for them. And it's also the beginning to get a little bit woo to create an alien religion. That's what that field is for them. For normal people who saw a funny light in the forest, or who are interested in, you know, in the topic, that's not what it is for the normal person. And that's where the problem lies, is that for normal people who have a casual interest or even a deep interest, they're coming into ufology, and oftentimes the New Age, which is just as infiltrated and corrupt, they're coming in from an authentic angle. Like, I want to learn about, you know, this craft that I saw, or I want to learn, you know, I heard someone talking about that there's 57 million different aliens, and I want to learn about that. And they're coming in with an open heart and with a desire to learn. And there's so many things that can be genuinely discussed to do with the cosmos, to do with other beings from other worlds, to do with our spiritual evolution, and even to do with technology, which most of it goes back to Atlantis anyway. But we don't really have that conversation, because there are forces that infiltrate ufology, that infiltrate the New Age, And for them, it's an opportunity to A, create a new religion, and B, bring forward a technological dystopia. That's what ufology is for a lot of these different groups. And that's what it's always been, which is why it is so weirdly controlled. But if we can begin to see it that way, we can get the best out of these topics. If we continue to be gullible and allow people to do this, we will get the worst out of it. And we will have to get pulled into the weirdest next 10 years of our life. We can do better. And we can do better through understanding spiritual science, esoteric science, whatever you want to call it, but the objective reality of the cosmos and the spiritual planes, because there is an objective reality to our esoteric history, all of that. That is what gives us the power to confront all of this weird subversive stuff that has, quite frankly, been going on since the 1950s. Probably a lot before then, but really began to pick up. So I think that's pretty much good. I think I'm gonna, yeah, okay. So I want to actually mention one more thing. Just do a little brief summary. So the reason why, again, people will do this, pretend to be aliens, it's weird. I mean, to be honest, I mean, I've been seeing some, I mean, I've been talking about this for years, but I love reading your comments because you guys have the funniest, best comments. And you're like, you're always like, this is so stupid. And you know, I think it's too sci-fi. I think it's too weird. And then it's like we always come to the question, like, why bother? Why do this? And it's because this is their religion, and it's because they have to. And if you are sort of more in tune with your heart and more in tune with yourself spiritually, you see it as basically what it is, which is a scam. But a lot of people don't, and a lot of people are not awakened. A lot of people are not aware, and that's okay, because we're not all supposed to be at the same level of knowledge. But the people who do know and the people that are aware, we have to protect the innocent that don't. And we have to fight for and push for honest conversations about this. And we have to have the courage and the bravery to examine our own ideas. And I'm an example of that because I believed all of this with bells on. And the more that I went inward and the more that I studied, the more I saw what it really was. So I want to be clear that I'm not coming from this weird place of arrogance that is laughing at this, because I would be laughing at myself, which I do anyway, but I would be, it'd be a joke on me. I'm coming from a place of really coming out of this and of being a propagator of this myself. I believed it. And because I did, now looking back, I understand the evil in it so much more, the darkness in it so much more. So I feel like when we do become aware, we have to create a better path for people who may not be aware, and that's our responsibility here. So we have to be on the lookout for basically, I think, hidden records. I think that there is going to be an aspect of this where, you know, there's these, you know, records that are found in like Tibet or the Vatican basement or some hidden place that basically rewrite the human origin story. And it probably is going to have to do with Enoch. And basically every single aspect of the Bible or a religious text will be brought forward and talked about as a means to look genuine, but the doctrine of resurrection will not be talked about, and Christ as a being and Jesus will be reduced to a man. And so we're going to have this idea that we're coming into all this knowledge, but the most important teaching will be demoted to nothing. So there will be an illusion of like, oh my gosh, I'm rediscovering the ancient history of humanity and this, you know, all this esoteric knowledge or hidden records discovered. And there's an overwhelming of hearing that. But at the same time, the doctrine of resurrection will be completely dropped or destroyed. And the real life of Jesus will be reduced to the average man who didn't resurrect. And that is basically to make it so you don't understand your process of resurrection, because when it comes to initiation, higher beings have to do it first. Human beings have to do it, achieve it first, and then we follow in their path, and we will be that influence for others one day. So when you remove that influence, you remove something very deep that humanity needs. So there will be an overwhelming streams of knowledge given about our ancient past and, Enoch, aliens, and all this kind of stuff. But then the most important things will be reduced to nothing. Okay, and that's the Luciferic and Harmonic influence. And the introduction of advanced technologies will be to make up for the fact and replace the idea of resurrection. So you get this idea of living forever. Oh, the space colonization. This is the saddest thing, is people that I see that claim to be Christians, esoteric Christians or dogmatic Christians, are all for apparently space colonization. You can't. Okay, space colonization suggests that human beings are going to live perpetually in the material plane forever, colonizing other worlds with our advanced technology, dominating the solar system. That ain't it. You can't have space colonization and the doctrine of resurrection. Because in the doctrine of resurrection, the true mystical doctrine of resurrection, the human form is transubstantiated and ascends into a higher plane eventually through work, through very specific awakenings and processes that are part of the mysteries, deep part of the mysteries that we classically know as resurrection. But this whole alien God thing removes that. And it's like, we're going to go colonize all these worlds. And there is no transcending of matter unless it's through some kind of contraption machine where you, like, bloop, bloop, you're just going to go to Tau Ceti now in your spaceship. You're just going to go to another timeline in your spaceship. That is replacing resurrection. Make no mistake. That kind of talk about machines being able to transubstantiate your body into a higher dimension, that is to replace resurrection and make you think that you can transform and leave matter, leave the material plane, leave time with a machine. You can't. It's a lie. And you will be told it. You are being told it already. Just get a chip in your brain. You can live forever. This is ridiculous. And these things are there to entice you to replace and satisfy your desire for what is really known as resurrection, which is your ability to get off of the wheel of samsara in the Eastern tradition. It exists. The doctrine of resurrection exists strongly in Christianity, but it is present in all religions, in all mystery traditions. So technology is trying to replace that. We have to be aware that that is going on. So you can't develop the resurrection body through technology. You can't. You can do some pretty crazy magical things through, black sun technology and through these different devices that tear holes in the veil, but you're basically just tearing a hole in the 8th sphere. You're not going wherever you want in the solar system, or you're not having a spiritual experience. You're literally just tearing a hole to hell into the lower astral plane and letting things in and going there. That's what you're doing through technology, which is something that the natural world would not normally allow you to do. But with technology, you can. You can force things and do these weird things for small periods of time. So we have to know that that's coming, because it's coming. Because you can't do with a machine anything truly, truly spiritual. It has to come from within you. And a machine cannot replace that. A machine can't even heal you. A machine can create a certain comfortable environment, perhaps, with frequency, but it can't heal you. Only you can heal you. So there's a limit to what these machines could even do. But we're going to be told that they're miraculous, that they heal the body. You can go into different dimensions. You can go through time. You can have free energy that powers your house and all this kind of stuff. This massive technological revolution where, wow, it's instead of developing spiritually and needing to do these things, we can just use a machine. It's a lie. And it's the same thing with the Neuralink stuff where, I heard one talk where it's like, well, why not just get Neuralink, you can like see infrared, or you can develop these senses. No, you develop spiritual senses, including the ability to see through walls, the ability to do incredible things, to see clairvoyantly, to read Akashic records. You can do incredible things with your body. You can light things on fire with your, like, they're called cities in the Eastern traditions. And it's always been known that the more you spiritually develop, the more you become initiated, you develop psychic powers. You develop spiritual powers, in which there are many, which are basically you redeem within yourself, that we actually had in an earlier period, which is where the pyramids come from and all this kind of stuff. We were incredibly psychically powerful. We redevelop these periods as we spiritually evolve and align with our inner Christ essence. That is how we gain spiritual power. And transhumanism and Neuralink, and like, why don't we just see it? Who cares about seeing infrared? That's nothing to being able to see clairvoyantly, being able to see the etheric body and see if there's a disease going on in someone. I mean, where it's really at is the real spiritual abilities. People can apport things. I mean, what you can do when you actually start to become an initiate, a spiritually evolved person, is incredible. Usually it's just done in the back rooms of it's very hidden because of the power. But I'll tell you, putting a chip in your brain to like see infrared, or like be able to like download what Wikipedia says, or some other man-made ability that you just want it like hardwired into, this is a sickness. This isn't spiritual evolution. It's not evolution at all. It's totally devolution, because that stuff begins to basically make you atrophy, because you cannot get a spiritual ability from a machine, from a chip. It's fake. It's what Rudolf Steiner would describe as fake clairvoyance. So thank you guys so much for joining me. I think that just about does it. I'm now going to head over to my members forum and take some questions. So if you want to watch that or be included in that, then head over there now. And I do a lot of live streams over there as well. So if you like this, I go very deeply into different topics, usually every other Sunday at least. There's forums to talk about this on a deeper level as well. And I would just love to see you over there. So I will leave you guys now, and I'm going to be heading over to my website. Thank you.